It is the Jim and Terry Show, coming to you from the Hobbit Hole studio in Bobcaygeon. I'm one of your hosts, Terry, and the empty seat is still in the corner. A warm coffee and perhaps some breakfast awaits my good friend Jim's return, although we're not sure when exactly. The house has now been, well, it's been an invasion from Alberta. Extended family coming in for an extended stay, and the Hobbit Hole studio is sort of out of bounds during the course of this visit. So I'm just putting together a few things here and there whenever I can. And this is one of those moments of quietude when it can be done. So here we go. What am I talking about? How about the deadly rise of anti-science? A book by Dr. Peter Hotez, someone who I followed from the beginning of COVID, someone whose public appearances drew my attention way back in 2020, and someone whose book I ended up purchasing as a read for those years of trying to understand why some people rejected the vaccines and still do, and what the repercussions are today. This is now over 6 years later, still refusing to take vaccines with RFK Jr. at the helm of Make America Healthy, question mark, exclamation point, close brackets, healthy again? Maha. Mwahaha. How about a sinister laugh for that one? And this takes me back to the previous podcast on the trial, not a inquiry, not a let's ask you some questions and hope for the best that we can get some honest answers. How about we're going to tie you to a stake and burn you if you don't answer? Fifth Amendment. I can see the memes now. Fifth Amendment Fauci. F and F. Fifth Amendment FAFO. I wonder if we can figure that one out. Fifth Amendment is your only recourse when it is a sham investigation, when it is not an inquiry but an inquisition, when the goal is to put someone behind bars for the rest of their life, when the goal is vindication and vengeance and spite, and when Trump is at the helm, leaning on Rand Paul to create this investigation. Because what? Because Fauci had some things to say that were very interesting about Trump. Maybe that's the whole point. Fauci's diary had some entries about Trump and his crazy, zany talk about UV and bleach, about ivermectin. And it seemed like he was trying to cater to his base. I don't know who the base is, but the people who definitely don't read peer-reviewed science journals, or the issue would have been a Joey Tribbiani moo point. Anyway, that was then, this is now, but deadly rise of anti-science seems to be the order of the day, and I'm revisiting that book because the outbreak of polio, of communicable diseases, of measles, mumps, rubella, the old MMR polio, the vaccines that we had as kids, all of that seems to be in question now with RFK Jr. And I'm linking that to the Rand Paul investigation of Dr. Fauci, just to show how off the rails America has become. Not just off the rails in terms of foreign policy, tariffing everybody, 50% on Canada. Let's Canada host our own Gordie Howe bridge opening ourselves and put a street hockey game on it. That's Canada. That's what makes sense. What doesn't make sense is the Senate inquiry into Dr. Fauci. You can still have questions about origin. You can still have questions about how to best manage a once-in-a-100-year outbreak. But looking in the rearview mirror is always just that, looking in the rearview mirror, trying to make sense of it. What was unfolding was real-time science, finding real-time solutions, plotting a real course of action based upon peer-reviewed science, and trying to get everybody out of this pandemic together in one piece. That's what a National Institute of Health does. That's what a Center for Disease Control does. That's what governments do when they follow the science, not made up conspiracy theory stuff, not eating roadkill raccoons from RFK Jr. and advocating no vaccines. What is going on in America? And I use the term FUBAR, that effed up badly beyond all recognition. And I think America's at that point where they are so effed up that with no guardrails in place, the crazies, the lunatics have taken over the asylum. And that is the feeling of many people talking about the current administration. The loonies have taken over. There is no reason. There is no logic. There is no anything resembling jurisprudence, the organized, methodical way of analyzing policy and of planning a way ahead. From the Iran war, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, to the day one bombed them into oblivion, to day 200 and something of that war. The Strait of Hormuz is no safer than it was when the war began. No way to get out of these things, and no forethought when you get into them, is how bad things happen. And I'm going back now then to the deadly rise of anti-science and Dr. Peter Hotez. And I'm just reading a little bit from his book, and I'm generally speaking about him. And in the book, Dr. Peter Hotez discusses how the anti-vaccine movement became a dangerous political weapon promoted by elected officials, amplified by news media, causing thousands and told thousands of American deaths. Now, I did allude to the fact that New York City had one of the worst outbreaks early on, and there were refrigerator units to hold corpses. The bodies were racking up, and they could not be disposed of fast enough. That PPE was being controlled by Jared Kushner for his own bank account's sake, and refusing to ship protective gear to the hospitals in states that were blue. And that's the definition, the embodiment of anti-science. You don't withhold PPE from the places where the outbreak is happening. You find everything you can and throw all the resources you can at the places where the outbreak is happening. And that includes all the new outbreaks, the viruses, the worms, the bacterial infections coming from tainted lettuce. Yeah, apparently the guy who owns the farms is a Trump supporter and donor. Who would have thought? Yeah, you remove the EPA, Environmental Protection Association, remove all the investigations, remove all the monitoring data centers, fire all the services, the people who are working for the government in these agencies, as in Doge. So how culpable is Musk for all of these deaths too? I wonder. Anyway, I digress. Getting back to Hotez. During the height of the COVID pandemic, he was one of the few scientists who made constant appearances, almost daily sometimes, on MSNBC, NPR, BBC, as well as other public broadcasting stations. Dr. Peter Hotez went often without sleep, working around the clock to develop, now this is worth noting, non-profit, because that's one of the far right's big concerns, that big pharma is making big money, big do-re-mi from the vaccines. And here is Dr. Peter Hotez serving as a director of an effort to make a non-profit COVID-19 vaccine to keep the public informed about public policy and the why behind the policies, the science behind the policies. During that time, he earned the reputation of being one of the most trusted voices on the pandemic, and he was even nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for his selfless efforts in regarding COVID-19 and public nonprofit vaccines. He also became one of the main targets of the far right and their anti-science rhetoric that gained traction through conservative news media outlets, and you know the usual suspects on the right. The book is an eyewitness story of how the anti-vaccine movement grew into a dangerous and prominent anti-science element in American politics, which we now call the weaponization of healthcare. How did that happen? How did we go from trusting science to not? How did we go from peer-reviewed literature leading the way to people who are on the fringe? And Rand Paul keeps on saying, but it's not fringe when so-and-so says it. Well, if you were a scientist and you were publishing peer-reviewed literature on solutions, then it's up to the peer review process to point out that your research seems to have problems. Peer review. Dr. Hotez, Dr. Fauci, peer review through and through. The Jim and Terry Show. It's alarming. 5-alarm fire. Healthcare. Deteriorating. RFK Jr. running amok. So is Rand Paul. Bye-bye.